When a president dies in office, the nation mourns. But when John Tyler died, the country hardly noticed. No flags were lowered, no mourning declared, not even a mention from the sitting president. He had been erased, forgotten, a man who once led a nation and ended with no nation to claim him. This is the story of America's most abandoned president. The year was 1840. America was changing. Railroads carved through wilderness. Cities buzzed with ambition and politics. Politics had become a battlefield. The Whig Party, a young rival to Andrew Jackson's Democrats, had just pulled off a masterstroke, electing a war hero, William Henry Harrison, to the presidency. Riding with him was a man few noticed, fewer understood, and nearly no one respected: his vice president, John Tyler. They called him Tippecanoe and Tyler too, but what America didn't realize was that the second half of that slogan would soon be all that remained. Born in 1790, John Tyler was raised in the shadow of America's founding. He grew up on a Virginia plantation, the child of privilege but also of idealism. His father was friends with Thomas Jefferson. The Constitution was debated over his family dinner table. Tyler believed above all in the sovereignty of the states, and that belief would shape every decision he ever made. But John Tyler had a problem. He didn't belong, not fully to the Jeffersonians, not to the Federalists, and later, not even to the party that would make him president. He was a man caught in history's middle, a constitutional purist in a time of raw, rising power. Tyler's career climbed through the usual Virginian path: state politics, then Congress, then governor. In the U.S. Senate, he made enemies quickly. He often voted with the minority, stood firm on principle, and refused to bend. He once resigned rather than follow orders from his own party. To many, he was principled. To others, he was arrogant, impractical, and, worst of all, untrustworthy. When the Whigs offered him the vice presidency in 1840, they weren't seeking loyalty or influence. They were seeking a name, a Southern name, a placeholder, and John Tyler, he was desperate to matter. On March 4th, 1841, President Harrison gave the longest inauguration speech in American history in freezing rain. 31 days later, he was dead. For the first time in the young republic's history, a president had died in office, and chaos followed. What now? The Constitution was silent. Was Tyler acting president? A placeholder? A steward until another was chosen? Tyler made a decision, one that would define and doom him. He declared himself president, full president, no acting, no waiting. His cabinet resisted, Congress hesitated, but John Tyler stood his ground. He had taken the oath. He moved into the White House, and he refused to be treated as anything less than the rightful leader of the United States. History would call it the Tyler precedent, but at the time, it simply made him enemies. The presidency was never meant for John Tyler. He had no party infrastructure, no agenda, no support. The Whigs had expected a puppet. Instead, they got a rebel. When he vetoed the National Bank Bill, the crown jewel of Whig policy, his entire cabinet, except one, resigned in protest. Congress tried to censure him. Whig newspapers mocked him as his accidency. His own party expelled him. The first and only time a sitting president has been formally cast out. Think about that. A president of the United States, with no party, no allies, no future. And yet, John Tyler kept going. Why? What fueled a man who had been politically exiled from every corner? That answer lies not in politics, but in the deep beliefs that had been planted in him since boyhood. Beliefs in states' rights, in constitutional order, in personal honor. But those beliefs would soon place him on a collision course with a rapidly changing country. The next few years would test not only Tyler's presidency, but his very place in the American story, because what happened next was betrayal on every front. Imagine being the most powerful man in the country, and yet utterly alone. Your allies have vanished, your party has disowned you, and outside your door, the nation mocks your very presence in the house you now occupy. This was John Tyler's America. By summer 1841, President John Tyler had committed what many considered the ultimate act of betrayal. He vetoed Henry Clay's National Bank Bill, not once, but twice. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was war. The Whigs, especially Clay, had built their platform around resurrecting a centralized national bank. Tyler, raised in Jeffersonian distrust of federal power, believed such a move was unconstitutional. But to Clay and the party leadership, it wasn't about philosophy, it was about obedience, and Tyler refused to kneel. The result? His entire cabinet resigned in coordinated protest, save for Daniel Webster, who stayed on briefly to complete complete negotiations with Britain. The Whig-controlled Congress responded by expelling Tyler from the party, the president expelled by his own team, and so a new precedent was born. The man in the White House stood alone. The backlash was swift and merciless. That fall, a crowd of enraged Whigs gathered outside the White House, built a life-sized effigy of John Tyler, and set it ablaze while chanting, "Down with his accidency." It was not just a protest, it was a public excommunication. Letters poured in, accusing him of monarchy, betrayal, and worse. His mail was screened for threats. Cartoonists had a field day, portraying him as a snake, a clown, or a ghost haunting a house that didn't want him. He had no party to protect him. The Whigs denounced him. The Democrats distrusted him. And yet, Tyler held firm. In Washington, politics is power, and power comes from support. But John Tyler had no party machine, no loyal Congress, no coalition to push through reforms. For nearly 4 years, he would fight, not just for legislation, but for legitimacy. Every bill he proposed was blocked. Every nominee he advanced was rejected. He once went 9 months without a Treasury Secretary because the Senate refused to confirm anyone he picked. It was paralysis by design, and it worked. Tyler's presidency became a ghost ship, drifting through history's currents without anchor or sail. But Tyler was not idle. Behind closed doors, he worked tirelessly, especially on foreign affairs, where Congress had less power to interfere. With domestic politics strangled, Tyler turned his eyes west, to Texas, the wild frontier that had declared independence from Mexico in 1836, and now sat as an unclaimed republic, coveted by both the U.S. and Britain. The annexation of Texas was more than expansion. It was destiny and danger. Bringing Texas into the Union meant war with Mexico. It also meant intensifying the already raging fire over slavery. But Tyler saw Texas as his redemption, a cause bold enough to outshine his isolation, a move that might secure his place in history no matter what the Whigs or Democrats thought of him. In secret, he began negotiations with Texas leaders. Quietly, methodically, he planned to force the issue. He would risk war, division, even impeachment for a legacy. But even as he played geopolitical chess with Texas, another drama unfolded, this one closer to home. At 52, Tyler became the first sitting president to marry while in office, to Julia Gardner, a 22-year-old New York socialite. Their union, scandalous for the age gap, made headlines across the nation. Julia was charming, fashionable, and ambitious, and Tyler was deeply in love. Some whispered it was a distraction, others claimed it was desperation, but in truth, Tyler's personal life became one of the few realms where he felt in control. He had lost the nation's trust, but won a companion's heart. Still, the marriage did little to ease the mounting political pressure. The Texas question loomed larger, and John Tyler was about to make a move that would shatter the political order one final time. He had no allies left, no future in his party, no path to re-election, but he had one card left to play, and it was soaked in risk, ambition, and the blood of nations. In Part 3, John Tyler makes his final gamble. Every fallen man reaches for one last act to reclaim his name. For John Tyler, that act was Texas. But in seeking redemption, he awakened every demon that threatened to tear the nation apart. This is the story of a forgotten president about to pull America into a storm of war, slavery, and rebellion, all for a place history might remember him. Texas had once belonged to Spain, then Mexico. But in 1836, American settlers led a revolution and declared independence. Now, it stood as a republic, vulnerable, wealthy, and increasingly desperate for protection. The British were watching. France, too. Both saw Texas as a key to expanding influence in the Americas. But John Tyler saw something else, a legacy. If he could bring Texas into the Union, he could cement his place as the architect of America's westward destiny, a feat even Andrew Jackson had failed to complete. It wasn't just policy, it was survival. For Tyler, Texas wasn't a state, it was salvation. With Congress and both parties turned against him, Tyler turned to back-channel diplomacy. He sent secret envoys to Texas President Sam Houston, promising security and eventual statehood, all without congressional approval. The gamble was bold and dangerous. To bypass resistance, Tyler struck a secret treaty in 1844, offering annexation in exchange for peace and alliance. But there was a problem. The treaty would require a 2/3 majority in the Senate to pass, and John Tyler didn't even have a third. Texas wasn't just land, it was slaveholding land. land. Its annexation threatened to tip the fragile balance of power between free and slave states, a balance already cracking at the seams. Northern abolitionists saw it as a slaveholders' plot. Southern leaders saw it as their last chance to preserve influence in Washington. In the middle stood Tyler, a Virginian aristocrat who owned slaves, yet claimed national unity. But unity was unraveling fast. Whigs accused him of engineering disunion. Democrats called it a distraction. And abolitionists warned that annexing Texas would lead to war with Mexico and perhaps within America itself. Still, Tyler pressed forward because now it was no longer about politics. It was about immortality. In June 1844, the Senate voted on Tyler's Texas Treaty. The result was brutal: 35 against, 16 in favor. The treaty failed by a landslide. It was not just a defeat, it was a public humiliation. One senator called the treaty an act of madness. Another said it bordered on treason. Tyler had staked everything and lost. Newspapers mocked him. The Whigs celebrated. Even his own wife, Julia, wrote privately of his heavy heart. The Texas dream had become a trap, and the trap had snapped shut. But history has a wicked sense of irony. In the 1844 presidential election, the Whigs nominated Henry Clay. The Democrats turned to a dark horse candidate, James K. Polk, a Jacksonian expansionist who fully supported Texas annexation. Suddenly, Tyler saw an opportunity. In an unprecedented move, he withdrew from his own re-election campaign and threw his support behind Polk. It was his last political maneuver, a backdoor deal with history. If Polk won and annexed Texas, Tyler could claim credit as the man who set it all in motion, and Polk did win by a narrow margin. And shortly before leaving office, in the final days of his presidency, Tyler pushed through a joint resolution of Congress, bypassing the treaty requirement entirely. Texas was annexed. John Tyler, the man without a party, without allies, and without applause, had won. He was mocked, hated, erased from memory, but as the sun set on his lonely presidency, John Tyler had changed the shape of the nation. Texas was his triumph, but it was also the spark, because what he added to the map would soon tear the Union apart. In Part 4, the ghosts of Tyler's decisions return to haunt the nation and him. A man may carve his name into the map, but history decides the price. John Tyler brought Texas into the Union, and in doing so, he lit the fuse of America's greatest war. This is not just the story of a forgotten president, it is the story of a nation that refused to remember him. In March 1845, John Tyler left the White House as quietly as he had entered it. No cheers, no celebration. Few even noticed he was gone. But his final act, the annexation of Texas, unleashed a geopolitical storm. Mexico broke diplomatic ties with the United States. Within a year, war erupted, brutal, costly, and bloody. The Mexican-American War would add vast territories to the U.S. California, New Mexico, Arizona, fulfilling the dream of manifest destiny. But with every mile gained, another question was raised. Would this new land allow slavery? Tyler had added territory, but he had also added fuel to a fire no one could control. As America expanded westward, so too did its divisions. Northern abolitionists saw the new territories as a chance to stop slavery's spread. Southern leaders saw them as essential to their survival, and so began a political arms race, each side vying to tip the Senate, the courts, and the soul of the nation. John Tyler had long defended states' rights, a concept he saw as noble, Jeffersonian. But in the decades that followed, those same rights would be used to justify secession. And Tyler? He had vanished from national life. No party wanted him. No administration called on him. No history books wrote his name. But the consequences of his presidency were everywhere. By the 1850s, the Union was cracking. Every compromise collapsed. Every attempt to hold the country together ended in blood and betrayal. And then came Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. The South saw it as the final straw. One by one, states seceded from the Union, and suddenly, the name John Tyler returned from the shadows. Not as a peacemaker, not as a former president, but as something far more shocking. In 1861, as the nation spiraled toward war, John Tyler re-entered politics, but not in Washington. He was elected to the Virginia Secession Convention, where he lobbied for disunion. That's right, a former U.S. president publicly supported breaking apart the very nation he once led. When the Confederate States of America formed, Tyler was chosen to represent Virginia in the Confederate Congress. He was the only U.S. president president in history to officially defy the United States government. To many in the North, he became a traitor. To many in the South, he was simply forgotten. He had no real power, no real platform, just a name, aging, isolated, and controversial. On January 18, 1862, John Tyler died suddenly in Richmond, Virginia, Confederate territory. He was 71, and when word reached Washington, President Lincoln issued no statement. No flags were lowered. No national mourning was declared. The official U.S. government did not even acknowledge his death. He died a citizen of a nation that would not exist for long, the Confederate States of America. His funeral was conducted with Confederate honors, the stars and bars draped across his coffin. He is the only U.S. president buried beneath a flag not of the United States. It was a fitting end to a life lived in political exile, not just from his enemies, but from the very republic he once served. He was born under Washington's Constitution, but died under Jefferson Davis's rebellion. John Tyler's legacy was neither triumphant nor tragic. It was something rarer, forgotten. But forgotten men often leave the deepest scars. And in Part 5, we explore the haunting question: was John Tyler the accidental president, or America's first warning sign? Some men shape history with glory, others with silence. But then there are the ones whose stories are whispered, not because they were unimportant, but because they made the nation uncomfortable. John Tyler was one such man, and in forgetting him, we risk forgetting something about ourselves. When the average American recalls U.S. presidents, John Tyler's name barely flickers in memory. He is neither ranked among the worst nor praised among the best. He is often omitted entirely, a man whose presidency feels more like a footnote than a chapter. Why? Because his story makes America uneasy. He defied his party, he vetoed his allies, he governed alone, and in the end, he turned his back on the very nation he once led. That doesn't fit neatly into the myth of American heroism. And so, Tyler was erased, not by enemies, but by a country that prefers simpler legacies. But to forget him is dangerous, because John Tyler set a precedent that lives on. He showed how a president can rule without a party and weaponize executive power to bypass Congress. He showed how political isolation doesn't stop a leader, it liberates them. And, perhaps most haunting of all, he showed that a U.S. president could later side with secession and not be held accountable. That fragile thread between democracy and disunion, Tyler tested it, stretched it, and finally walked away from it. He left behind no great speech, no towering legislation, but he did leave something else, a warning. Today, when presidents clash with Congress, when party loyalty crumbles, when leaders act alone, you can feel Tyler's ghost, not as a guiding star, but as a shadow. He was the first to break the mold, to say, "I am not beholden to anyone." In doing so, he empowered future presidents to do the same. But what happens when a president listens only to himself? What happens when the people elect one man and no one can check him? Self? What happens when the people elect one man and no one can check him? In 1841, the Constitution faced its first true stress test. It survived, but the cracks, they remained. History is filled with men who built nations, but just as important are those who tested them. John Tyler was no hero. He was no great villain either. He was human, proud, stubborn, brilliant, isolated, misunderstood. He wanted greatness, but found only exile. And yet, without him, there is no Texas. Without him, no Polk. Without him, perhaps, no Civil War. To understand America's rise, we must also study its fractures. And John Tyler? He was the fracture before the fault line broke. The president without a party. The traitor to the Union. The man history chose to forget. John Tyler was all of these things, and more. But perhaps, he was also a mirror. One that still waits for the nation to look back and see what it's become. You've found meaning in this forgotten chapter of American history. Subscribe to The Past Unfolded. Here, we don't just tell stories, we uncover the ones time tried to bury.